Been watching ball with my big old brain and think the tape needs some explaining. Studying the stats to understand it. Hey, yo. Talk data to me. Talk data to me.
What is up, y'all? Welcome to episode 11 of Talk Data to Me. I've got a very special guest today, which I'm now going to put on the screen. And it's Mr. Jacob Gibbs. Jacob, Mr. Fantasy Football Today newsletter over at CBS. If you guys aren't getting that, you should be. It's free. It's free, as we like to say. It's free, y'all. Free. And the Beyond the Box Score podcast. And you guys probably know him on Twitter. If you don't, you should be following him at JAGibbs, GIBBS _23. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dwain. Yeah, excited to be here. Free. Beyond the Box Score, all that good stuff is free. We are here, 2 men of the people, and we've got, one of the favorite topics of the people, of the sickos for sure, all the people on Twitter who know us, data. And I couldn't have been more excited to get the invitation to come talk data to Dwain. So great to be here, man.
I love it. And you and Dan, you guys have a fantastic show. So you guys really should check that out. So guys, what we're going to talk about today is something that's really fun. And it's ultimately we're going to do kind of two parts to the show. We're going to get to some actionable player takeaways for rest of season, range of outcomes. But first, we're going to talk about the data journey that we go on as fantasy / football analysts and all the research that we do. And it's going to feel a little bit sacrilegious from two people that are associated with data. But part of this is the things that don't matter. And so we'll get into that conversation more here in just a second. But Jacob, you saw the show last week with Mr. Matt Harmon. And so, we've got a tradition on this show, and I don't try to embarrass people, but, I want to let people know who you are. And I go to Perplexity AI. That's our AI partner here at Fantasy Life. If you guys would like to have Fantasy Life Plus free for a year, you can. All you have to do is go sign up for Comet, and that is the web browser for Perplexity AI. And you will be able to get it for free. So you just go to fantasylife.com/Comet and you can get that. It will walk you through the steps. But let's see, what does AI say about Jacob Gibbs? And I ask the question I ask every week. Is Jacob Gibbs a good fantasy analyst, or whatever someone's good at? Like Matt Harmon, it was the film. And here's what it has to say about you, Jacob. Jacob is widely considered a strong and well-regarded fantasy football analyst, recognized for his data-driven approach, even though he's going to get sacrilege on you here in a second. He's known for being data-driven, folks, so just hear it now. And a high accuracy, and for your high accuracy in your player rankings and how you've done in some of those contests. Talks about what we mentioned with your newsletter as well as Beyond the Box Score, so folks have already heard about that. But just talks about your ability to really blend traditional stats with advanced analytics, targets per route rate. You and I have been going back and forth with targets per route stuff for like 3 or 4 years, like in each other's comments on Twitter. So love that. You do a lot of stuff with coverage data, the impacts of scheme, that, two things that you and I really like to get into. So just, you have a really good job of getting into the nuance, right? And some of the weeds of these things. Now we're going to talk about how predictive those things are and how much they matter in a second. But if at a minimum, they are very interesting, right? And they're part of the whole picture whenever we start to talk about players. So just really good things to say. So if Terminator takes over soon, I think you're in good standing, Jacob. I don't think you have anything to worry about here. But yeah, you're good. But having said that, I also like to ask an opening question, to every guest. And it's kind of it's a little bit of a heater, and I try to pin people down a little bit here. These are the kind of questions that make me uncomfortable and I don't necessarily like on shows. And so I just try to, give it back to my guests. And so here's my one question to you, Jacob. If you were stranded on an island and you could only get one piece of information about players to make fantasy decisions, what would that one piece of information be and why?
Utilization score, of course, right,
Oh my
Dwayne?
God, you're don't brown nose me, man. I'll take that answer.
Honestly, yeah,
We'll
it's
talk
like
more about it later, but yeah,
it's that or expected fantasy points or something like that. Like a
yeah.
quick, if it's just one, it's the quick and dirty solution to like give you your best guess. And I think you do it about as good as anybody.
Well, thank you. I think an alternate, guys, would be just fantasy points per game.
Right.
As much as we try to figure out things that are going to predict the future, it's pretty hard to beat fantasy points per game. Ryan Heath has done some interesting work over at Fantasy Points. He's done some really good stuff with first down data, and so some really strong stuff there. But yeah, I think if I had to pick something for me, obviously it would be the utilization score. But if I didn't have that available to me, and like all I could do is get something simple, it would probably be fantasy points per game, or like you said, expected fantasy points. So, all right. So, guys, here's the setup here. Jacob and I were going back and forth in our DMs yesterday about the show, topics for the show, and we want to make it conversational. And we were discussing the ideas of like what are the most important things, from a data aspect, maybe the least important things. What are the things Jacob really gravitates to? And I thought his reply was actually really fantastic. And you guys are going to think it's weird when I say it's fantastic, because he replied, "Nothing matters. It's a fool's errand," which was really surprising to me in a way, because Jacob tweets so much about data. It's part of what he talks about, whenever he writes about players and rankings and all these things. He's constantly referencing data. But at the same time, I think it's really fantastic that you said that, because, and Jacob even responds like, "Hey, if that won't work for your show, we don't have to talk about it." I'm like, no, we absolutely should talk about it, because I have been on a data journey in my life through different jobs and different things. I've always used data to inform like how I think about things moving forward. And what's very interesting on this journey that I have found in fantasy football is there is so much that really doesn't matter. And we really want like that holy grail. We're constantly researching. I spend so much time, and you do too. I know, Jacob, every offseason researching, testing these things, trying to figure out if there's different, like, hey, maybe this complements this other thing. But ultimately, there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. So I want to start there and really leave it open for you and just elaborate on what you mean by nothing matters. And more importantly, like, how did you come to that conclusion around data?
To quote Bill S. Preston from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure,
Great quote.
as he quotes Socrates, "True wisdom is knowing that you know nothing." To which Ted replies, "That's us, dude." I think that's kind of where we've arrived here. That's an old reference for people.
It's a good one though.
Yeah,
Bill and Ted's.
I love that stupid movie. Yeah, so I said the same thing when JJ Zachariason had me on his podcast last year, and I think it does surprise people because I'm constantly, you know, tweeting about data. Like it's either data or film, like almost a 24/7 stream of
Again,
consciousness.
great follow on X, guys. Go. If you're not following Jacob, what are you doing? Go do it.
Basically just a 24/7 stream of consciousness from me during the season on Twitter. And like, of course, that's going to be a bunch of data because I am digging into this stuff all the time. So is, Dwain, of course. We are like kind of mad scientists when it comes to this stuff. And I think like, honestly, mad kind of might be a key word there though. Like I'm not convinced it's worth the effort unless you are fine conceding that like there is a possibility that the end point is nothing matters, good luck, have fun. And that's kind of where I've arrived. Like I think there's this ego thing that happens where like we want to like your ego keeps you alive so that you can like find like through finding purpose, right? Like you want to assign purpose and meaning to this data, and that's fine to like go along that journey. That can be fun for sure. You're probably going to learn a lot along the way, right and wrong, like through that journey. But like ultimately, most of what we're dealing with is descriptive, right? So I did want to make sure that it was like if we're going to embark on this, like what is some of the most important data, what's our favorite data, and all that kind of conversation. I really wanted to just be clear to people that we don't like cling to this as having to be important or having to be meaningful in any way. So I've got a couple of recent examples. The first one is this tweet from Heath Cummings, one of my colleagues here at CBS, that just cracked me up. And you mentioned Ryan Heath. His research is just fantastic. If you don't know Ryan, follow him, Ryan J_Heath on Twitter. So I used Ryan's research here, and he's got like 25 stats or whatever, all the nerdy stuff that we like to dig into. And this is just relevant to receivers. Like he does this for all the different positions and looks at which ones are sticky year over year in terms of being repeatable, and then which ones are predictive of next season fantasy points per game. And like you said, fantasy points per game, previous season fantasy points per game is one of the most. I was just talking about first downs because first downs were actually slightly more predictive than fantasy points per game, which is a huge surprise, of course, I would think for people. And Heath quote tweeted my tweet about this and is like, every time I see one of these awesome charts from Ryan, I'm reminded how many very awesome stats we have that are not very helpful for projected fantasy football production moving forward. And that's true. Like if an actual like data person were to look at the correlation here, they'd be like, what are you guys doing? Wasting your time with all of this. So that's kind of why I brought up the word mad. The insane aspect of it is like, as much as we love it, it's more about the obsessiveness that you and I have with like football and it being fun and us wanting to understand all of the different parts of this extremely complex dynamic thing, more so than like thinking that like this has to matter. I love what Ryan does. I really like definitely don't want to say that nothing matters here as it pertains to his work, because that guy works really, really hard. And like I've had it, and you, I'm sure, have we've had tons of huge hits using per route data. I love per route data so much, you know that. Like I'm hoping Rashee Rice is about to be the next one. Like we use this data all the time, but at the end of the day, it is mostly descriptive. So like I came from a background of really not even watching. I mean, I didn't have access, so all I did was watch football on the TV. I wasn't able to watch that much film, but like now being able to like dig into it and like watch the all 22, you find that there are freaking 22 dynamic pieces in motion with any number of factors pulling strings behind the scenes. It's just like so complex, and there's so much context that goes into almost every single play. Like the fantasy results that we get are made up of these individual components, and basically every play, every component has its own set of context. And so, Dwain and I do our best to lay out that context during the offseason, dig into each individual aspect, but still, like when fantasy draft season rolls around, and I want to talk about that in a nuanced way or whatever, we end up slapping, this data predicted Puka Nakua's breakout on the title. Like did it really?
I know.
It was among the indicators that suggested Nakua had talent. Like he did have insane per route data in college, and I do think that was important. But there was so much circumstantially that came together to facilitate the early career opportunity and the role catering that led to his insane production. And like since then, Nakua has worked on his craft like an insane person. Like he's some kind of anime protagonist. Like the character development is absolutely insane. He comes back transformed every single year. Like he's a clear outlier, I feel like, that's ascending to heights that we've never even seen. And so like we can use the per route data to illustrate that and how cool that is, but like I'm not sure it's useful in predicting anything really, right? Like using his career arc is almost never going to be relevant or predictive as it relates to other players. And still, like I created a preseason superlative segment on Beyond the Box Score this year where Dan and I attempted to like identify who's this year's Bucky Irving, who's this year's Puka Nakua.
Yep.
Because it's fun, right? Like, and that's what's important to me is like not to let the data like threaten you or anything, like not to see it and get all mad or whatever, like or reactive about it. Just let it be what it is. And you can have fun with it if you want. And you can potentially like come to some like helpful observations along the way too, I think. And so like this, I'm finally, Dwain, arriving at my second example here. One of the names that I mentioned as like an off-brand Puka possibility was Harold Fannin Jr., who's another, per route demon. Coaching staff like seemed totally enamored with him from the moment he stepped in the building. And like now we are seeing him immediately, which is really rare as a rookie tight end, but like immediately be able to translate the skill set from college to the pros. And so like I recently tweeted out this video. I don't know if you saw this play or not, Dwayne. goes to the ball away from the defense and does like a barrel roll upon catching it that
Yeah,
almost kind of,
really sweet.
it's hard to say for sure like how intentional it all is, but it almost looks as if he like does this in a way that like lulls the defense to sleep, and then he can like immediately roll out of that and get up and run. And I tweeted that out just like, here's yet again like another example of like, you like, we can't, especially in this guy's case, you can't use traditional data when it comes to combine testing and stuff like that to predict what this guy is going to be able to do on a football field. He's so weird is the word I use, because he is just like this uncanny different type of athlete. And even to that, people are trying to quantify it. They're trying to, well, I know that, actually what we're looking at here is this circumlinear movement skill, and you can quantify it using the gauntlet drill and 3-cone and all this stuff. And it's like,
No, you
maybe,
can't.
maybe you're right. And you
No, you're not.
know,
You can't.
if you
I'm sorry. Combine testing is one thing that we can definitely throw out the window, guys. Like, I mean, I've tested it every which way to Sunday. There can be small things like speed score and stuff, but still, like, I create the rookie supermodel every year as well, and like that stuff ranks so low. But no, it's a great example though. Both of those are great examples. And talking about the landing spot for Puka Nakua, and then there's other landing spots where it doesn't help make a player better, and they just have to be good on their own. And so, like, there's, to your point, there's so many dynamics. It's 22 moving parts, is what you said. We have a ball that's not round; it can just bounce weird ways. There's so much variance in the game. And honestly, so a lot of the things you talked about, I mean, and we've gone back and forth on these things too. And I try to share them on Twitter. Ryan does great work, but I go through a similar exercise every off season, and man, I test every new thing I can get my hands on. I look to see, okay, is it something that the player potentially owns? And how we look at that do we see it as something that's sticky to the player year over year when we look across a big sample of players? So that's the first step. And if that checks out well, then the next step is, okay, great. Is this something that actually helps us think about what the player could do in the future? Does it correlate strongly to either next game fantasy production, which now we're talking about super small samples, but we do in-season work and then we do off-season work. And then I also look at like rolling 4 weeks of data, right? Because like almost like a new little mini season in the NFL starting every 4 weeks as defenses respond. Because what do defenses do? They watch the last 3 to 4 weeks of film as primarily what they focus on for an offense. And you'd be amazed how many of these coaches, like, they don't even call players by names. They're so buried in their own world of having their team ready. They're like, hey, number 1 for the Bengals, we're like, we know that as Jamar Chase, guys. They're like, hey, number 1's getting the ball a lot. And so what do? They put together a defensive game plan because Jamar Chase has been going on for 3 games to try to take him away. And then what happens? T. Higgins, who's not done anything, suddenly springs off in that game because he gets the single ISO covers that the team is looking for, that the quarterback likes. Again, now we're talking, think of all the variables we just talked about, like in that one thing, and there's so many more than what we talked about. So I think those are really fantastic examples. And Puka Nakua, while he's a good player, is he Puka Nakua if he's not on the Rams or if he's not on the 49ers, somewhere that knows how to use players in that style? Is Deebo Samuel if he doesn't land with Kyle Shanahan early in his career? Playing pretty good right now with Washington, but also a lot of similar concepts that he has in a coach with Cliff Kingsbury. So I think it's really good, like what you just brought up. And so what I would say is this, like the way I think about this stuff is I don't think they don't matter, but what I think is they're all part of a puzzle. And if you try to tout any one of them as being the end all be all one thing, I think you really run into dangerous ground. And again, to your point, like we're all trying to find the next thing, but you got to be honest with yourself. I will tell you this, Jacob. I spend, I don't know, hundreds of hours every offseason researching this stuff, searching for new things. 99% of that stuff comes up empty, completely empty. Like I get I learn things, to your point, along the way through researching it, but I don't come up with something new that I think I can actually integrate into the utilization score or something like that. Like, and a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about the utilization score here in a little bit, guys, and the things that are in it. And a lot of them are more traditional things, because what we run into is the new thing we think we found is really just double counting, like what we're already getting from like targets or something else. And we want it to be so much more. And it doesn't mean those things can't be great, to your point, to have fun with and talk about and help paint like the broad picture of the player. The challenge is whenever we get into what you mentioned of wanting to tout it as being the reason. And we say, this has to be the reason. And we need to let that breathe. And so the way I think about it is this: fantasy points per game. Like if we're thinking about a car analogy, like you're thinking about buying a new car, like fantasy points per game, like that's the car, man. That's the car. That's the starting point. And when we start to look at all these other data points, really what we're now doing is like, okay, I want to look at this car a little closer. I want to check the interior. I want to check and make sure the transmission's open. I need to pop open the hood and I need to look beneath it to say, are there any things here that are potential red flags for me? Okay, great. You got a guy going off in fantasy points per game, but he's not getting targeted. He's not getting looks like in the green zone. He's not getting things that typically we see historically associated with high fantasy production. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, is this sustainable, right? Or is this something where potentially this has just been luck so far that this player is scoring these fantasy points? And most of the time, the two things check out. They end up, okay, you look at the fantasy points per game, you look at the stuff under the hood, and you're like, looks good, gonna buy the car. But then there's also the flip side of guys that it looks like a hunk of junk. And then you look under the hood and you're like, okay, but it's got these 4 or 5 things, not one thing, these 4 or 5 things that are actually really positive about this car. I think I could like buy this thing and clean it up a little bit, and I might be able to flip it like for something else later. So that's the way I try to think about it. You're looking at the fantasy points per game, and this is really with all these data points. And then you're going to look under the hood and say, okay, like what does the rest of the data story tell us, like holistically? And does it really align? And again, it's not going to be perfect, guys. There are going to be hits, there are going to be misses, and the more you shrink down your sample, the more chance there is for this miss. So I want to talk about, Jacob, like let's, and feel free to jump in like with other things, but I jotted down a few things that we could talk about here that kind of go along with this. And one thing would be, things that you think are definitely overvalued or overhyped. I wrote down a few ideas. But if you have something here that you're like, this one just kind of drives me crazy, when I see this, and I think you shared with folks, part of what it is when it gets touted a certain way, right? And that we don't have the humility to step back from it. But are there certain things that you look at and whenever you see people reference them, you just, I don't want to say roll your eyes. We're not making fun of anyone here, but you already know, like, you're like, okay, I've looked at this, guys, and I know for a fact, it just doesn't matter.
Well, I would mostly leave that to you, like, because I think you've done a lot more work in like finding which stuff doesn't matter. But I think the ones that stand out to me clearly is like small sample size stuff. I just don't think people have a good enough understanding of like how long it takes for things to stabilize. And that's something that like I have a tough time with because like I want to keep people updated all along the way with how things are developing, and so like I don't know, like I've become like more and more conflicted with this because like I know like you and JJ in particular. I feel like JJ Zachary's and like do such a good job of doing this work responsibly, and you have also like been able to build out your own like community where the people who follow you know where to go to like get your exact thoughts on all of this. Whereas like I'm just kind of like out here just like talking, like I'm still kind of new into building all this stuff out, right? You know what I mean? So it's like I don't know, like sometimes like if I should even just not say it or not, because people can just take a small sample size
They
thing
will.
and run with it and get so out of control. And like once you say something, even if there was no intent other than just to say it as it is and let it be, it becomes meaningful in people's minds a lot of the time. And so that's one that's tough. And like even if you've written about it and there are articles and everything on record where it's like you can point people to it, like no, not a lot of people are going to be able to seek that out and do, and even not a lot of people are even going to conceptualize of that. They're just going to see it and take it.
I think a really good example of the one you're talking about that I think about, and again, it doesn't mean people can't write about it, can't talk about it. It's just like the context that matters on the sample size stuff is like when we're way early in a season and we want to break down all these coverages to like the 10 different kind of basic coverages we can bucket things into. And when you start digging into it and you're like, oh, when they faced single high man coverage and this kind of thing, like they've been targeted this awesome and this much. And then you go look at the data and you're like, oh, they've had 5 routes against that coverage this season.
Yeah.
Like And so, I mean, like, it's cool. It's fun to talk about. And the reason why it's fun to talk about is because you're kind of, when you use that data, you're blending it with really what's happening on the field. And that's a fun, like, nexus point, like to be at of, we're looking at the film, we're watching the film, we're seeing what's happening. Oh, we actually have data that charts this kind of thing. So, like, I understand, like, the want, but, like, for me, I basically break it down to man and zone after about 5 or 6 weeks. I don't talk about man or zone coverage until week 5 or 6. I think I talked about it for the first time in an article this week or last week. And that's because I can actually zoom out and say, okay, there's actually enough data here to at least say something about the player. Not say it's going to necessarily be predictive, but just call out to this point, hey, they're playing a high man coverage team. And all I'm looking for is outliers. Show me the top 3 man coverage teams in the league. I don't need to write about, like, the number 15 man coverage team against a guy who gets, man targets. So, like, an example this week that Ian used was last night. And it was the fact that T. Higgins has been used so much against man coverage. Now we have a new quarterback. We have so many variables. So Ian didn't, like, go overboard with it. He was very balanced with it. We just talked about how much T has done against the broader sample of man coverage data versus what Jamar has done, against zone. And then he talked about, okay, the Steelers play like the 3rd or 4th most man coverage. And so, like, I think it's fine, like, to share those sort of things. And again, like, do it with, like, humility. But once we start slicing it down way past that, especially early in the year, like, man, like, it gets really tricky. And I'm not knocking anyone that does it. And I think there are potential things you can get from it. But I do struggle to think that there's actually really a big edge in that kind of stuff because of the sample size you talked about.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're following any sort of matchup based stuff that's getting into the, like, nitty gritty like that, you definitely need to make sure that the person who's providing that data is doing it responsibly. So Ryan, Heath, and I do a show every Thursday called Mastering Matchups. And even that, like, you bring up the humility side of it. Scott Barrett suggested that we call it Masters in Matchups. And I'm like, brother, we are not masters in matchups. We are on the path to mastery. Anybody who wants to join can join us, but I am not taking that on. And, like, even this week, it is like so detailed. It's very easy to miss stuff. So, like, when I say that, like, you need to make sure they're being responsible, I'm not claiming to be perfect. This week, I was talking about, Caleb Williams really struggles against cover 3. It's been a big bummer because cover 3 is the defense that's used the most. And he's facing a Saints team that's top 5 in cover 3. And then Ryan, who's just the best at this stuff, is like, well, actually, like, there was one game where the Saints used a ton of cover 3, and that spike week made them look like a top 5 defense. But all the other games, they've basically been neutral. I'm like, thank you, Ryan.
And that's where
like,
Ryan does a great job.
Yes,
and that's
absolutely.
the sort of thing that you're talking about is making sure you just share that, again, share the context of how it happened. And guys, it would be the same way if, like, you were looking at a player that's averaging, 70 yards on the season. And then you go look at it and it's like, okay, they had a 150-yard outlier game and really not done very much in all the other games. Same kind of concept, right, is being applied here to what, Jacob's talking about.
Yeah. And yeah, we also, like, on this show, we were so excited to get the show together. This is our first year doing it, Ryan and I. But then the first 4 weeks we were like, we don't really have anything to talk about. Like,
we don't have enough data to talk about.
We truly don't feel like it's responsible of us to, like, give you the stuff we want to. So we're just going to basically do start sit. And then about a month, and we kind of find
dude, I love hearing that. And the reason why is because you have the self-awareness. And the way you have the self-awareness is you guys have both been on the journey, because there was a time when I was similar that I hadn't been on the journey yet. And I was talking about things that honestly I hadn't done all the full research on. And guys, you'll see, like, if you go back to my earlier writing when I was first at PFF, there's so many things that I talked about then that I don't talk about why, and, I don't talk about now. And the reason why is I've since done my due diligence and research and figured out that basically there's certain things I was talking about that just don't matter. And so while they're cool and while they're interesting and actually people want to read about those things, I don't put them in my columns. Because I had a similar conversation with JJ last year on data perspectives. Sounds like we had probably a similar topic, like things we're getting wrong. And JJ does a great job with that kind of show. So let's talk about. I'll throw one out there. I'm going to stay. You went sample size, so I think just new stats in general. Mm-hmm. We get so excited about new stats for good reasons. We want the holy grail. We want the thing that now ups our ability to predict something more. But because it's new, we have a tendency to want to just gravitate to it. And it's differentiating, right? It's something other people aren't talking about. So it gives you an angle in your content. And the challenge is, like, you really have to step back and do the research that we talked about, that, Ryan does, that I'm doing, that JJ does, to look at, to say, okay, like, does this actually matter? Do we have a big enough sample to even say if it matters or not? We might not. Like, if it's something we've only got data on for a year or two, it can be tough. And the other thing that I find a lot with those sort of things, Jacob, is you run into, it really just overlaps with something we already have. And so what happens is, when people over integrate that into their process, they're now double counting. So, like, if you think about anything like at the target level, if you think about anything at like these higher level stats, like the rushing attempts and things like that, as we start to get more advanced metrics that tie down into those things, what I found quite often is, like, the targets are actually already just telling us this. Like, and then when I compare them to one another, I can see there's this massive correlation already between them that's telling me that they're probably telling us the same thing. So that doesn't mean you can't include it and figure out, well, hey, for this kind of portion of like what I'm looking at, I'm going to give a weight like to each one of these things, but then I'm going to let that only add up to being X amount, like in the way I look at a player, versus just adding on and adding on and adding on and adding on. And then now suddenly you're in a scenario where, like, you've just really overdone it with something. And again, I want to really reiterate, this does not mean new data points are bad. I want them. I love that we continue to push the boundaries. I love the fact that we continue to get new data points. It's just about making sure that we are doing the research and we are figuring out what are the best ways to use them and apply them. So I think really good stuff calling out sample size, because like that really does get into some of the new stat stuff.
We all want them, right? And I think
We love them.
That's why we keep seeing more and more of them push to the forefront. Is like, what do people want? People are trying to fill that niche. And I think specifically, like, player specific stuff is what people really want. They want to know more about the players. And that's where I think you really get into double counting, is like you start doing this like player talent type of stats, which is often based off of small sample sizes and stuff like that with efficiency, or like basically any rushing efficiency metric, like, is kind of, I wish we had better ways to illustrate what's happening with running back efficiency, basically, is what I'll say there, because there's just so much going on with, I talk about there's 22 moving pieces on the field, specifically on running plays. There's almost that many pieces all there as part of that play. There's a 5-on-5 or a 6-on-6 or a 7-on-7 happening that's influencing where the running back's able to go with the ball. And that's extremely dynamic, whereas like a wide receiver might be isolated. Obviously, there's a lot of coverages and everything that's going on with the receivers too. But like the running back efficiency stats are tough to cipher through.
And what's really interesting on the running back efficiency stuff that I found in the research that I do is number one, the efficiency itself does not correlate to future fantasy production at all. It's zilch. Yeah. It's nothing. That's number one. Number two, running backs that are more efficient, and if they're the backup, there's nothing suggesting that their coaches will actually now give them a larger workload in the next game, the next month, or the next season. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
So the coaches are clearly thinking about things that we're not, and their process that they're going through to deciding how they're going to divvy up the playing time doesn't align with basically what we want it to be. And that's back to your point earlier, when we want these things to be more than they are. And it's still, we want to talk about the efficiency because it's fun. We're going to talk about Bill Krosky-Merritt in a little bit. Dude, just ripping off massive runs. We love it. And all things equal, we prefer players that can hit the big plays, so that if they do get a larger sample, theoretically, if they can keep that pace up, which a lot of times it goes away once their workload increases. But we have seen guys like Devon Achane just keep on keeping on. The efficiency was down last year, but more to an injury. It's back this year. And so like, it's not that it doesn't matter, but you can't like just put a stake in the ground, honestly, and say, because of this, if he gets a bigger workload, it's going to stay the same. Or because of this, he's going to get a larger workload. The data just clearly says the opposite, that it just doesn't happen. Now, there are also cases where it does happen. Sure. All we're saying is it's not predictive. It could happen or it may not happen. The narrative you hear all the time, I mean, almost every show you turn on will be, oh man, they have to play him more. Mm-hmm. He's awesome. It's happening right this week with Rico Dowdle. Mm-hmm. How are they going to give Chuba Hubbard his role back, man? Rico's earned the role. Well, they paid Chuba last year in the season, the rare in-season contract extension, which also, guess what, guys? We have 0 data points on. And guys getting contracts, it doesn't mean that they get larger workloads all the time. Like, so to your point, like there's so much variance in it, and like we can talk about it, but at the same time, like it doesn't make anything a lock case. We really don't know what's going to happen with Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle this week. We can say Chuba's coming back from an injury. I don't really want to take on the re-injury risk. They don't need to force him into a bigger role. They might, but Rico Dowdle looks good, so I think he's got a better ceiling and floor this week. And I could be wrong. I say that on the show. Guys, I could be completely wrong. But over the course of the rest of the season, if people are thinking Rico Dowdle now has this role, he could, but I think they're probably in for a pretty big shock. We're probably going to have some sort of a split. He's going to have more work probably than he had before, just because like the two games were so good. But again, it doesn't guarantee it. We've just seen this play out so many times where there is a chance Rico Dowdle just goes back to the same role he was in before. And so I try to middle it, because we don't know. I'm like, all right, I'm going to give Rico a little bit more work going forward, but it's still going to be a split. And I've got Chuba for rest of season projections, right, sitting in the lead. And again, it's a gray area. I'm not saying that it's going to be right, but I'm trying to be in the middle is all I'm trying to do on that scenario.
Yeah. And so the point I wanted to get to with the player specific stuff is that I think actually like probably what's more important is the team level stuff. And that doesn't get nearly as much attention. And so we've shouted out a lot of guys today, a lot of great analysts. Two more that I wanted to add are Lord Reeves, Rich Rebar, Lord Reeves on Twitter, and then Hayden Wings. I think those two, in addition to Dwain and JJ and everybody, do a really good job of helping you understand the team level stuff. I mean, Javonte Williams is the obvious one where it's like what's happening in Dallas right there infrastructurally is so important. Dan and I have tried to do a really good job on Beyond the Box Score of digging into quarterback play, offensive line play, all of the stuff that the coaches are doing to unlock this for the players, because I think honestly that's probably in most cases a lot more important than the player talent.
Look at JT versus Breece Hall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that scenario this summer, right, was okay. People thought that both guys were talented. One went in round 2, one fell into round 4 with Breece Hall, but there was the bet that their talent could overcome the situation. Essentially, for JT, it's working, but not because his talent's overcoming the situation. It's because the Colts offense has gone bonkers with just a serviceable quarterback under center that keeps them on pace, right? Keeps them ahead of down and distance. And it's unlocking all the scheme stuff that Shane Steichen wants to do, all the layups that Anthony Richardson just wasn't making. Whereas on the flip side of that, you've got, Breece Hall playing essentially with Anthony Richardson. But what's funny about it is Garrett Wilson's still going off. So it's like, you would think if you've got a bad quarterback, the number one person it would impact would be Garrett Wilson. He's surviving it, and Breece Hall has been tanked. Why? Because they've wanted to use 3 running backs until now Braylon Allen is gone. Yeah. And in the last couple of games, Breece Hall's workload is upticked due to that. And so maybe he can overcome the scheme. But I think it's hilarious that people are out there saying the reason Jonathan Taylor is hitting is because he was just a massive bet on talent. Yes, he's good, which helps whenever this scenario, but really the things that are unlocking Jonathan Taylor are all the things you talked about.
It's the best offensive environment in football. It just is. Like what Shane Steichen is doing right now is incredible, and there's a number of ways.
And JT's part of that.
Yeah,
he helps build that. He's part of the environment.
Yeah,
but
I wanted to bring it back to Fannin and then just wrap up with like this being overrated is the player evaluation stuff and all of the double counting that happens with that. So Fannin is awesome. Like all of the weirdness to his game that I talked about earlier, whether you want to call that like just him being a dog, it's guile, it's grit, it's gumption, it's creativity, it's all this stuff like that. I can point you towards like the fact that he leads all tight ends in yards after contact on receptions. And like that is a stat that I do think is meaningful in helping illustrate who he is. But like at the end of the day, like he is a freaking Cleveland Brown, like all of this stuff that is cool about him is less important because of the team level factors. And so I just think that really does go overlooked. I think like, it seems really simple, but like I just think we get so enamored with all the cool ways that we can dress up what's happening and get excited about these players. There's nothing wrong with that. I love it. I love having fun. I'm in all the dynasty leagues, so like I'm totally fine just being never wrong just never wrong just early.
It's early.
But like at the end of the day, if we're talking about like what's important right now for like winning fantasy football and stuff like that, you definitely need to pay more attention to the team level stuff. And I'll shout out Hayden and Reeves again. Those guys are great.
Yeah. And so one of the things I like to look at on that is like how often is the team getting to the red zone? Like what percentage of their drives? And that can also help you with teams that are potentially due for positive regression. Like the Rams right now already have like the number 14 or 15 offense and touchdowns per drive. But when you look at them in red zone drives, divided by their total drives, like they're one of the top 6 teams. And so there's a lot of cool things like, so the Rams like could actually even be better, moving forward. But when you look at the Browns, they're at the very bottom. And so while you might rack up the receptions and things like that underneath for Harold Fannin, to your point, like the upside case is just, you have to think of it in more bearish terms versus bull terms, because like there's not a big path for him scoring a lot of touchdowns. It's just going to be a problem, for the Browns this season. So I love that call out. We were talking about Matt. We're going to come back to some things, guys, that we do think matter and like how we work through that. I loved your shout out on the offensive line injury stuff. Matthew Friedman does all that work here at Fantasy Life, and I'm pinging him all the time about it. We have a data scientist that works on it, and he talks a lot about cluster injuries. So when a team has multiple injuries of starters that are now out of the lineup, and then he's also looking on the defensive side of the ball. And sometimes it neutralizes because they're like, well, the defensive line is missing 4 guys.
Right.
The offense. And then so there's all these extra steps you really need to take. But he does a great job with that. I'm glad you called that one out, because I think injury data, and I talked about this on JJ's show last year, is one of the most underrated things. And so I loved it when I saw you doing that work. And actually, when you did it, I sent your tweet to Friedman and I said, this is the content like you should be doing. You are actually the master of this content. You have been doing this for so long. You know what it means. You've studied how much it matters. Friedman's a sicko. He's a sick man. And
point that in my direction if he does it, because that took me for freaking ever to do that. And I'm sure he would do it at a higher level with more efficiency.
Well, yeah, no, you're doing great too. I just wanted to call out Friedman because I'm constantly pinging him about it. But I wanted to kind of step over just real quick, because we talked about, we kind of hit on the matchup stuff. And I want to share some data really quickly with people. And so this is talking about when we're thinking about at a weekly level. Jacob, earlier we were talking about you're getting ready for your draft. We're looking at a season-long projection, that sort of thing. So it's a little bit different. But guys, there is so much variance on a week-to-week basis. How many people thought that last night's game, perfect example, between the Bengals and the Steelers, was going to be an absolute wheels-off shootout? No one. These are 2 slow offenses. Neither one of them reached the red zone very much. All bets were off. And so in a 1-game sample, anything can happen. And so I went back, Jacob, and I did the research, and I haven't shared this yet on a show. I had done it in the offseason, working on some of our models in the back end for Fantasy Life and thinking about the way the projections would work. But some of this information floored me, guys. So I'm going to start really quickly with matchups. Okay. And so thinking on a week-to-week basis, defensive points allowed versus actual team totals carries a 0.33 correlation. So when I say actual team total, what the team actually scored in the game, okay? If you look at defensive success rate, it drops to 0.23. Defensive EPA per play, it's 0.27. So they're all pretty close. You can use any one, but my point again, like, guys, the defensive points and yards allowed are already telling us. And then we feel the need to go into all this next level stuff and explain it again, when really the data, the raw data point we have actually has a higher correlation to future fantasy success. And to your point, it's still low. Like the 0.33 should immediately send off alarm bells as to how much we should care about it. But again, so like, do we really need to talk about all that? And that's why I don't talk about EPA or success rate. I'm not saying anyone else can't, but I'm just like, hey, we're here to score fantasy points. And it's the stronger number, like based on and this is at a game level with all the Vegas odds before what actually happened in the game. So defensive pass yards allowed is a 0.32. Defensive success rate is 0.2. EPA per play is 0.2. Again, we're counting the same things here. Now, you can still use it as that check under the hood, like, oh, this defense looks really bad, but their EPA and their success rate actually says they're better. So that's a way that I think the better way to think about using those things in combination would be to find potential scenarios where you're like, I know this is what this defense says that it is, but it's probably not. There's a bunch of other examples I have here, guys, but they pretty much are the same thing for touchdowns allowed versus passing touchdowns in the game, rushing yards, passing yards. The raw data that you're going up against for the game, for the team coming into that game, what they had given up for the season, is really the best indicator. And it's not even a great one. Okay, what about odds makers in Vegas? Man, they know this stuff, don't they? Team totals. Vegas game totals versus actual game totals over the last 2 years across all games is 0.24 correlation.
Not good.
Not ideal. And what do we do? And I still do this too. I talk about the matchups for Vegas, but you know what I do? I only look at the outlier edges. Now, I will tell you guys, I have also researched at the different buckets of team totals, projected team totals, and then what the actuals are. When you break it down at that level, Vegas is directionally correct. If they say a game's going to be higher scoring, they are directionally correct that the game will often be higher scoring, but it is still not perfect. There's still a lot of room here. And so if you look at the Vegas team totals, which is you take the spread in the game, guys, and then you take the game total and you combine those things. You know, one team is favored, one team is actually the underdog. And once you take that away, then you ultimately get your team total for the week. The correlation there is better, 0.40. Like, still not great, though, to your point. Like, if we were in another industry, like I have a buddy that works in meat science, and I could just imagine him looking at these numbers where they build X-ray machines that make sure people don't get foreign objects in their food. The companies send it to them. They have technology that looks at it, and then they say, yes, this passes. If they had something that said, hey, we get a 0.4 correlation on how often we get this right, they would the customer would be like, I'm not buying that product.
Yeah.
They'd be like, I can't use that. Like, the P values on this stuff is so low. Again, I had a bunch more examples here, guys, that broke down passing yards, passing touchdowns, because I'm a sicko and I have a need to know all this stuff. But I'll give you one. Vegas team totals versus rushing touchdowns for running backs, 0.08 correlation. And how often are we using the Vegas team total to drive our starting point for projections on a weekly basis for how many? That's what most sites do. And then that ultimately goes down to the running back and it helps divvy up the pie. Mm-hmm. Last thing here, though, player production to date, passing yards coming in per game versus what they actually did in the game, 0.43. Again, not great, but better than the matchup stuff, better than the Vegas stuff. So if you are modeling these sort of things out, I just bring it up, like, you should really think about your weightings, which is why I did this work. So we could think about the way we were weighting these things in the back end and our projection model. But I just wanted to throw those out there. And again, this is coming down to like a 1 week at a time. This is analyzing literally every game that happened over the last 2 years. And you can just see, like what Jacob mentioned, like things that get talked about all the time. And I do talk about them as well. They're probably over talked about. And last night's game is a perfect example of how it can go very differently. Again, I think the key is you want to focus on the outliers, and you probably want to bake that some into your process, and everything in the middle, you don't need to worry about on this matchup stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to get good players on good offenses. Go get Bucky Irving.
Yeah. Good players on good offenses. Go get Bucky Irving. Okay. So a couple of other things here, and we'll get into some player takes. But I did want to talk about like a couple of other concepts. One, things that I do think matter, and then like how I put that together. And because there are so many variables, like that's really was the genesis of the utilization score. It was like, okay, we know there are certain things that actually, from a standpoint of like our industry, not like the meat science industry, we know which data points are the strongest. We can research that and see that. And then we know which data points overlap. And so the whole journey with the utilization score is to say, okay, let's focus on the things that we actually do think carry the most weight. And let's look at how we would put those things together and not use double counting. So if something is really telling us the same thing, we're just going to leave it out. And then we put these things into buckets. And so I'll tell you guys like what they are for running back. I'm not going to give you how I have them weighted. You have to go figure that out.
Oh man, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
I was getting the cheat codes
but
today.
It's things that, and this is based off of studying how predictive these things are, one game to the next, rolling 4 games to the next rolling 4 games, and then season over season. And to be clear, the utilization score is primarily built to help you adjust your preseason takes to now your in-season takes. Mm-hmm. So really it's about that one game, but mostly it's about once we get to 4 weeks and then projecting out what we think the player could look like over the rest of the season or the next 4 games. But for running backs, it's very simple. It's snaps, and I use snap percentage. So I use their raw snaps and snap percentage. Snap percentage helps us because we know game scripts can go differently. Mm-hmm. And so we need that to think about how we would project going forward, but we still care about the raw snaps per game because, to your point, some offenses just don't run as many plays. Mm-hmm. Arthur Smith, historically, very slow play caller, has been again this year. I haven't even looked to see last night if they sped up any. Obviously, in a 1-game sample, they could. Short yardage snaps. So a lot of people will use the inside the 5 stuff. The problem with inside the 5 is it's so small. And I show people that in the utilization report, but it's not in the back end utilization score because short down and distance work correlates super highly with work inside the 5. So why not expand the sample and say, typically, if a guy's got the short yardage role, they also have the role inside the 5. And now we get a larger sample to look, does that player really have that role or not? Guys, attempts are one of the most sticky things for running backs in the season. Year over year, they're not. Teams can reevaluate. They can, and it's still pretty sticky year over year, but changes happen. And we know injuries, there's all sorts of stuff that could be impacting that. But once you get into the season, like it works. And then routes per game, route percentage, and then targets. And that's the big key, guys. Targets are a massive driver for running backs. And you've already heard it. Like if you have a running back that is getting base down work and they catch passes, you're pretty much golden, no matter what kind of offense they're in. Now, if they're in a better offense, you're going to get a better ceiling, right? But if you've got a player that can catch passes and doesn't get pushed off the field in a game script, then even if they're on a bad team, and that's been part of Breece Hall's problem this year, is when they get behind, they're not letting him play the 2-minute offense. They're giving that to Isaiah Davis, even though Breece Hall's really good. And so unpredictability there, guys. We don't know what coaches are going to do. So all of those components are really what goes into, the running back model. Any questions from you on those, Jacob? And notice I talk about a lot of different things and I give context on things. That was a pretty straightforward, simple list. And the final thing is their fantasy points per game, which is really a proxy for their talent and the situation they play in. Because if they're getting all those things and they're scoring fantasy points per game, they probably play for the Indianapolis Colts and they're probably good. If they're not scoring very many fantasy points and they're getting all those utilization, metrics are coming in strong for them, they probably play on a bad offense or they're not very efficient or it's both. And so to keep it simple, like originally I thought about doing all this efficiency stuff and I started testing it. I'm like, no, PPR points per game, and I made it 22% of it. That ended up being like the sweet spot for it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a proxy for catching all that other stuff, the environment of the team, how good the player is producing on their opportunities.
Okay. Yeah. So I've got a bunch of stuff at running back that I'm curious about. You brought up attempts being sticky game to game throughout a season, right? Is what you said.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about some of the potential impending rookie takeovers that we are predicting? I'm obsessed with Bashal Tutin, for example. I think you can talk about any situation you want. I think the player who stood out to me the most, hearing everything you're talking about, is clearly Javonte Williams. And Dan and I have this season, it just has been Dan continuing to push him as high as possible, and me being a little bit apprehensive about it. But honestly, at this point, I've got him in my top 15 overall players. I just did where, if I was drafting today, where would everybody be? And he was 15th. And it's why not just keep pushing him up and even into the top 12? He has everything that you just talked about in terms of being sticky and predictable. He has fantasy points. He has attempts. He's 4th among running backs in targets per game. And the offensive environment is amazing. So he just is, it's him, ETN, Dobbins, but especially him, because I think people have this idea of what he is as a talent in their head that that's kind of been stuck and left him lower value than he should be. You could take that in any direction. He's just who came to mind right away.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And I have something that I can actually put up on the screen for people that I just updated. Ryan Heath and I actually talked through this whenever we did a show together.
On paper, he looks better than Jahmyr Gibbs and people like that. You know what I mean? Kyron Williams, for sure. It's, I don't know. I've got such a hard time dealing with him.
So let's start with your first question, which is, okay, what about guys like RJ Harvey, et cetera, et cetera? So what people are looking at on the screen here, and I'll make it a little bit bigger, we're looking at running back production in the first 6 weeks of the season versus the rest of the season. And this is for rookies based on the round they were taken in. And what you'll see here, these round 2 picks for running back in the first 6 weeks average 7 fantasy points per game. Over the rest of the season, they average, and this is second round guys, they average 9.2. So they experienced a 31% increase from here on out. Okay. Is it going to start this week? Guys, that's not what this is saying, but it's saying that over the average of the rest of the season production, they are going to score more fantasy points. Now, it won't be all of them, but it's going to be some of them, because these are averaging things out. There are guys that were actually below it, but there are other guys that are above it. And then that's where that 31% is getting averaged out. And the workload also changed. So here's snaps, 22% improvement. So the guys that fit in that bucket, right, this year, Quinshon Judkins, Trevion Henderson, RJ Harvey, like they fit that bucket. I won't sit here and go through every one of them, but essentially it's the earlier round picks. It's the second, third, and fourth round guys that experience this. And like another way to look at it is just to bucket it, all together. And some of it comes down to sample sizes and things like that. So number one, I would say, yes, the rookies like Bajal Tutin and things like that, they're great examples of where this may not continue for an ETN, and we could see a larger workload for the rookie down the stretch. So, and that's why attempts, being sticky, like it's still not fail safe. So if you look at attempts like per game, 0.67 correlation rolling 4 weeks over rolling 4 weeks in the season. If you look at attempt share, it's 0.73 correlation rolling 4 weeks over rolling 4 weeks in the season. If you go obviously down to a 1 week sample, that goes lower. I won't bore everyone with that. But basically the idea being is like, it is ultimately sticky, but it's still not perfect. And the reason why is because some of those things. And just weird things happen where a player gets benched or whatever. Like there's all these dynamics that are going on. So very good question though. So yes, on Javonte Williams, like I moved it up 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now with Miles Sanders out and Jaden Blue showing nothing so far, Blue could eventually take over some of that role. But I do think that at this point, we have to assume that even if Javonte gives some of it away as they start to feel better about Jaden Blue, like it would take a miracle at this point for Jaden Blue to overtake Javonte Williams. It's going to take an injury. It's going to take Javonte suddenly playing really poor and the coaches caring enough that they would use that as a reason to see more Jaden Blue, which they don't all the time. We already discussed that. So I think there's a lot of variables there.
Yeah, truly the only thing that I've thought of with Javonte is that we've never seen him have a 55+% snap share, even dating back to college in a season. And so maybe it just gets scaled back where they want to keep him more fresh, because we've just never seen him take this type of a workload over a full season.
But he's got the size. He's got
right,
most things that if you look at like the true bell cows, and we get exceptions of guys that are smaller that get the big workloads. But a lot of coaches have a propensity to base it on size. And again, it's not perfect. Some coaches do, some coaches don't. But I think with Javonte, I think that's fair, but I don't think that's going to be a very big factor because
I don't
what
either.
they're probably looking at is like, well, we're through 6 games and he's doing it. And the other thing is they throw the ball so often in a lot of these games that the ultimate rushing attempts and the wear and tear on the body isn't potentially as high. Because like, even though he's getting those really high, rush share attempts in some of those games, it's not like he's getting 18 attempts every single game. Some of those games it's like 12 because they're having to pass all the time. The other nice thing for him is he is staying on the field on passing downs. He's obviously not the first, second, or third option on most plays, but he's out there enough that he runs into these check down games where he gets the spikes. And we've already seen a couple of them where he gets a little spike in the receiving production. So yeah, really good questions. And I don't want to bore everyone, but like wide receivers, very straightforward. It's like, it's routes, it's targets, but the real nuance that starts to try to peel away the quality of the environment that you're in, it's catchable targets and catchable air yards.
Yep.
Those are in the formula for the utilization score. So you could see a player, and we're going to talk about one later with A.J. Brown. You look at his targets and you're like, that's fine, man. A.J. Brown should be good. And then you go look at catchable targets and you're like, oh, that's why A.J. Brown is not doing very well. And what's interesting about it is catchable targets are not quite as sticky as targets, period, but they're close. They're pretty close in rolling 4 over rolling 4. Because I thought, honestly, when I first found it, it was going to be like, oh, it's cool, but the stickiness of it is way less than targets. And it wasn't. So it's in the model. Your utilization in the red zone gets a very small component because that can be highly variable, but we'd also know that it's very important, right? Red zone and end zone targets are big. So like think George Pickens, like that's where George Pickens is playing great everywhere. Man, he leads the league in end zone targets, and it just keeps happening every week. And the more you do that, the more likely you are to score touchdowns. Air yards, obviously another component, and I already talked about catchable air yards. So, but again, pretty straightforward list. And guys, I have looked at tons of other things that could be in here. And ultimately what I found was duplicity with something I already have here, or honestly, something that made the model perform worse. And so it's pretty, and the tight ends are very similar to that. So I do believe those things matter. But to your point, like I don't want to hang my hat on any one thing. What we're trying to do with the utilization score is get a holistic look at the player's role overall. What are all the different ways they're involved? When we're then accounting for, are they playing in a good offense? And like, are they producing when they're giving their opportunities? And utilization score, yes, is more predictive than fantasy points per game. It's more predictive than any single stat I've seen. Like, but again, I'm being honest, it's not like it's like this 95% thing. You know, it's like 5% to 7, depending on it's like 5 to 7 percentage points above fantasy points per game, depending on which position you're talking about. So it's an edge, and it's still, I prefer it because I feel like it gives me a more holistic view on the player as well, you know, when I'm thinking through it. So I say all this because ultimately the other impetus behind the utilization score for me, Jacob, is I really wanted to get to range of outcomes based analysis. And I needed a way to do that with a data point that was holistically capturing these things that would then allow me to build out a database over time that then I could backtest against, and that I could actually look at comparison players based on the score. And then you can paint that range of outcomes. And for me, the journey where I've landed is because of what you said. Like there's so much variance in all this stuff. I believe the best way to educate people is to embrace that. And the best way to embrace that is by providing a range of outcomes based on a player's profile. And just be honest about, look, this is based on what they're doing. These are the comps they've had. This is how often they've been a wide receiver 1. This is how often they've ended up finishing as a wide receiver 4. Here are all the times in the middle when they were a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3, because then I can get something actionable and I can say, okay, if I could trade for player X at a price tag of wide receiver 3, and then I think that they actually have a better chance to still be a wide receiver 2 and a small tail chance to be a wide receiver 1, then I can profit in that scenario. Now I can target them at that wide receiver 3 price tag and know that I've got upside. May not happen, but I've got upside for outs here to get to a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 1. And on the flip side, I'm looking at what's my floor. I'm pretty much buying a player at their floor if I'm doing it in that scenario. I don't think there's many cases where they finish as a wide receiver 4 instead of a wide receiver 3. And so you can start to craft a strategy of how you want to target players and what price you want to target them at. So anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Like range of outcomes is like totally where my brain has shifted to over the last 2 years. And I've been on a maniacal journey, like to get there and to do it the right way. Like there's been a bunch of crap I've had to throw out that I thought would make it better that haven't. But this is where we are today.
Thank you so much for taking that journey. It is very cool. Like I think range of outcomes is the way that I think too, and I think it's probably the best way to think about fantasy football in general, because we've talked about that it is so dynamic and chaotic. And so it's like if you simulated this a million times, what would happen? Most likely, and then based off your risk tolerance, what type of bets are you willing to place within that? Those guesses that we can make. I think that's really cool. And I've been really excited to hear you talk about this stuff. Cause like when I haven't got to dig into the nitty gritty of what you've got going on there, but I hear it. I'm just like around it enough. Like I listen to your guys' recap shows, you and Ian and stuff. And I'm like, this sounds really cool. Like this is, if I had the creativity and brain power to like make something, this is probably what I would come up with.
You definitely do.
And so I just want to thank you for doing that. Like even as you were looking at the running backs earlier, I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to go there or something. It's like I said this to the FFT readers. I wrote a newsletter that was hypothetical fantasy points don't help my 0-2 team. And it's because I think people gravitate towards like my head in the clouds type of view of this, because I do enjoy it and think it's fun. And I get really excited about the possibility of these players. And just that can end up being a little too sensationalist, where you get all these players on your bench that aren't freaking playing and stuff like that. And they've
got a great ceiling. We just don't know when.
Ian has even like kind of made fun of me when he comes on the podcast for that kind of thinking, it's like, oh, we're playing for weeks 14 through 17. Like, well, it doesn't really matter if you've only won 3 games, like,
Yep.
And so I think you do need a grounding force. So like, I don't think I should be your only influence. And I think Dwain and JJ are the two that I point people to. Ryan is like the on the come up, but he just doesn't have, you guys have such like experience doing this. And then like you've taken the time to go do this kind of stuff. And it's so cool to me. I wanted to bring up Tootin specifically though, like
Yep.
for my people. And like also in reference to, I saw Caleb Johnson on your chart. So it's like lower draft capital guys. It looked like a 1% increase in their usage from like the first half to the second half or whatever it was he had outlined there. And it's like, I think like that's important. There are edge cases, there are outliers like Toot, and he could be that. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Bucky Irving was that last year with the exact same coach, but history tells us most likely it won't happen. Right. That's where I'm at with Toot. I'm waiting until the buy. I'm waiting until the week 8 buy. And if it hasn't changed by then you can move on if you want.
What I would say is the further along, you move in the season, there's two ways that you could think about it. Right now, we're still at a breaking point where it still looks good for the rookies. But what happens is as I continue to extend those weeks out, where we get to week 7, we get to week 8, we get to week 9, we get to week 10, the probabilities start to drop. Now you get some weird stuff in the last 2 weeks of the season because a team will be like, we're just not going to play Alvin Kamara the rest of the season because what's the point? Our team's bad. We don't want to get him hurt, assuming he's still on the team. So we're just going to give Kendre Miller a run. I know he's not a rookie, but that is just an example that popped into my mind. So it's never perfect because teams that are out of it can make that kind of choice. Like, we just want to see our young guy now. We're going to let our veteran rest and we're going to kind of see what we have here in this player. And so there will still be those outlier edge cases as you move along to where then you now get that workload for the rookie running back, but it's over a really small period. It's like the last 2 games when they've given up. So what I would say is the best takeaway is the further we move along, the less and less likely it becomes overall looking across all rookies as a group, as a whole. There will be outliers that get the scenario we just talked about, but a lot of them won't. A lot of them are beyond competitive teams, that are going to keep feeding their starter. Like Jaden Blue, if we get another 3 or 4 weeks in, like that data is going to look a lot worse for him. If you haven't done it by then, now you're going to start to see the deterioration in that 31 or 33% number that I was sharing.
Can I ask you about one more player that just came to mind? I don't want to get us super sidetracked.
Do it.
You were talking about what goes into your model and catchable being part of that. And of course, that's different sources chart that differently. But Devontae Adams, I have such a hard time knowing what to do with him. Barely over 50% of his expected fantasy points have been catchable thus far. Like he's by far has the most end zone targets. Like it's him and George Pickens up at the top, but like less than half of them have been catchable. Where are you at with him? Because if you look at just catchable expected fantasy points, he's in the same range as like Devontae Smith, but it feels like it should only increase, right? Like his uncatchable expected fantasy point number is 53. It's 9 fantasy points per game that have just been like left on the field, and no one else is even close. Malik Neighbors is the only one that's even close on a per game basis, and he's at 7.3. Do you think
so? Number one, you're looking at the right thing, in my opinion. So just so you guys know, so targets, rolling 4-week sample in season, the stability, and this is an R squared value, 0.62. Catchable targets, 0.6. So they're right next to each other. But as far as predicting future fantasy points, it's a 0.83 R squared for targets, and it's a 0.87 for catchable targets. So really close in how sticky the two numbers are. And the catchable targets actually matters, and they're close too, but the catchable targets, and this is based on data since 2020, guys. That's how long I've got this database built back to, are slightly more important. But what I think we have to think about there, and again, we don't know for sure, but the context is there's a couple of things happening. Number one, Devontae Adams, because of Cooper Kupp's role, is working more downfield. Okay. So the moment you start to work more downfield, your catchable target rate is going to go down. The further the ball has to travel in the air, the more chances you're running into a cornerback and a safety. Now you've got contested coverage. Also the accuracy from the quarterback, just generally speaking, just like if you're outside, like at a practice range shooting a gun, guys, the further out that target gets, the harder it is to hit. Same thing for a quarterback. And that's why we see like these crazy air yard numbers sometimes, uncatchable air yards, and it's like on 3 or 4 big plays where the receiver's open and the quarterback just airmails it. I mean, and Mahomes does it. Everybody is susceptible to this, and it's a highly unstable stat. I'll tell you, if somebody's talking to you about targets over over 20 yards and they're talking about how accurate a quarterback's been, all those things, it's fun. It's description. It's a nice description, but completely whack. It's all over the place year to year. There are a few outliers of guys that are actually consistent at that on a year-to-year basis. So there's always outliers. But where I'm going with that is, so number one, like he's working more down the field. That's probably not going to change. It might in the games without Puka. We saw that with Mike Evans last year. Once Chris Godwin left, they maneuvered Mike Evans to play more inside on the numbers, gave him a broader route tree. So we could see it over the next couple of games. In fact, I would expect it because Davante Adams has played a role like that historically in his career, more intermediate. But for the long term of the season, I think the catchable target rate that's tied to his average depth of target is probably remains a problem. But you have to account for the fact that Davante Adams is learning a new scheme, and he and Matthew Stafford are still getting on the same page. And so that's where I think the upside is if they continue to establish their connection and rapport, it would definitely, if that happens, Davante Adams is going to be a wide receiver 1 the rest of the way. If that doesn't happen, Davante Adams is going to be like a mid-range wide receiver 2 that's going to give you spike weeks, and then he's going to give you some weeks where he's more of a wide receiver 3. And again, we can't predict it, but it's logical that 2 guys that are as good as Matthew Stafford and Davante Adams are eventually going to get on the same page and go on a run. And we did see that last year. Now, I know it was with his old, buddy, Aaron Rodgers. They worked out kinks as well early in the year, and Davante Adams went nuclear in the fantasy playoffs once they got back on the same page. So also a little bit different scenario because Aaron Rodgers already knew Davante Adams. But does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely makes sense. Compare him to Brian Thomas Jr., 10.5 catchable expected fantasy points per game, and a similar type of setup, I think, in terms of the way that they're
same problem
coming.
For BTJ. Yeah. Yep. Uncatchable targets, which we saw snap back into place. And Matt Harmon did a great job last week on the show of talking about what they had done on film, changing BTJ's role back to what he had done so well last year, instead of trying to make him honestly play the more diverse role. And so that comfort level that he and Trevor Lawrence, maybe not as much Trevor Lawrence, more Mac Jones, but yeah, the comfort level those guys had last year and the trust factor, can go up. And again, we're describing things now, guys. These are not things we're saying are 100% predicted, but to your point, a very similar scenario. And then last week we saw my daughter's favorite band is Arctic Monkeys, but they have the song Snap Out of It. Snap out of it. And so he snapped out of it. We don't know if it's for one game. Hopefully it's for the rest of the way because we all have a lot of money invested in BTJ, but it can happen. And I think that's kind of untapped upside, but it could also just continue to be a problem. We don't know. We don't know for sure.
No. I just want to keep rolling because there's a bunch of players we have to get to today.
Yep. All right. So here we go. We'll hit these in 15 minutes.
All right.
So guys, we are now we got a couple of actionable player takes there in the end. If you guys have any questions for me or Jacob following the show, just hit us up, and if you've got stuff like you heard us talking about that you want to know more about, we're probably also going to do another show at some point together. We might do a home and home in the off season, something like that, where we have more time to dig into these. We were just talking on the show before, like we are so, crunched like Monday through Wednesday, putting out content for you guys for like the season. Like if we plan this well ahead in the off season, like we would have much more time to kind of collaborate on how we want the show to go. So I think what we're doing today is good, but bottom line is we'll revisit it. So if you guys have questions, let us know. But let's start with rest of season range of outcomes here. And what we'll do is I'm going to share the utilization score for the player, and I'm going to paint a range of outcomes. And then Jacob is going to tell you which one he thinks is the more likely, and then give obviously his takes and where his head's at and why it's there. Okay. So let's start with Bill. Bill. We got Mr. Bill Krosky-Merritt. And so the way I handled this is the bull scenario is looking at weeks 5 and 6, when essentially he's taken over the role. And last week, we know Chris Rodriguez was injured. He did play, but only played 2% of the snaps. But the bull case would be you're thinking, I don't care. I think this is Bill's backfield, and what he's done in the last 2 weeks, probably around what we think like his mid-range would be. And he could actually be more, he might be a little bit less. But in that scenario, looking at weeks 5 and 6, He has a 72 utilization score. He's averaged 16.6 fantasy points per game. Here are the number of he's had 48 comparisons in the utilization score going back to the year 2020. They averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game. Okay. Remember, I just said he's averaging 16.6. So he's already out kicking the coverage, but he's been a very efficient player, and that's part of how he's doing it. But running back 1 to running back 12 finishes on the rest of the way, 15% of the time. He was a running back 2, meaning running back 13 to 24, 56% of the time.
Okay.
And then he was running back 25 to 36, 19% of the time. So that's if you believe what you've seen from the last 2 weeks of Bill. You don't care about Chris Rodriguez. Those are your ranges of outcomes based on historical utilization score comps. A bear scenario would be you include week 4 before he fully took over, and you're like, we're actually going to look at a little larger sample size here and bake in some risk that his role could actually be a little bit more similar to larger than what we saw early in the season, but still not quite what we saw in weeks 5 and 6. And just to give you guys an example, weeks 5 and 6, he had 66% of the rushing attempts. If we expanded that 3-game sample, 57% of the rushing attempts. The routes and targets were about the same, but this would now be his range of outcomes. Top 12 running back, instead of being 15%, would be 5%. Being running back 13 to 24, instead of being 56%, would be 32%. So 37% of the time being running back 24 or better. And here's where the big thing happens. 52% of the time you had a running back 3. And then 11% of the time you had a running back 4. So 37 to 48. So number one, Jacob, if you were doing this and you had control over the utilization score, which you can just go over there and look at it, which scenario are you more leaning into? That what we saw for the last 2 weeks is what we're going to get? Or do you want to look at a broader sample and be a reasonable human being?
I do not.
I love it.
That's no fun. That's no fun. Everybody knows that I'm a Bill Bull. Like, if they know me at all, I've loved this guy. And so I'm really glad to get this context from Dwain, where I just did rest of season rankings, and I have Bill at running back 15, which fits basically perfect into the bowl case that he laid out. But I think the other case that he laid out is very important, because there is risk. There really is. He could be 1 or 2 fumbles away from losing a lot of this work that we've seen, in which case, using these 2 weeks is not at all relevant or representative of what we'll be able to expect going forward. And I also think that McNichols has played well. He really has. I don't know so much if Rodriguez is going to cut into his work. He might, but if Bill doesn't rise to the occasion, it wouldn't shock me to see the role scaled back. And so I definitely think that that's relevant. You said over 50% chance of being outside of the top 24, right? At running back.
In that scenario, if that were to happen to him. And again, I think that's why I love this stuff, is because you can think through the 2 things you just thought through. And then you can put together a rational process of, okay, if I want to go trade for Bill, or if I want to sell Bill, I can kind of use this range of outcomes, and based on my risk tolerance, everyone's a little bit different. You're a bull. I'm a Bill bull. I'm going to go with the bull scenario in case 1, which also had a 15% chance of being a top 12 running back. That's important. Okay. It's not huge, but it's important. It wasn't a 2%, it's 15%. We could have a top 12 running back here. Most likely we have a top 24 running back. And I would agree with you about probably where you have him pegged. I think in my rest of season projection model, where I go in and tweak this stuff every week, I think Bill came in at 16, 17. So right there, close to what you were talking about. That's a separate step that I do. So I'm with you. I would buy the bull case scenario, but just realize you don't want to overpay, because just keep the bear scenario in your mind is the way that I would say.
For sure. Stay grounded. Always stay grounded. That's why we got Dwain here.
All right. AJ Brown. So a different thing. We got a different thing going on here. Mr. AJ Brown, where to start? 64 utilization score this season. Not good, guys. The utilization score is on a scale of 0 to 100. It was an 87 in 2023, and last year it was a 76. So I have to think about this kind of player a little bit different, right? With Bill, we're looking at this year. Whenever we look at a player like AJ Brown, we need to keep the context of what he has done in his past also in our mind as we think about. So what I'll do often with players like this is I'll paint a little broader range. With Bill, basically I'm staying 5 points on either side of his utilization score. And I use that to go grab the comps. On a comp like AJ Brown, because of what he's done in the past, I think what you have to do is you have to be willing to paint a little bit broader range, with maybe this year being more closer to his floor versus what we've seen in previous seasons being closer to his ceiling. Now, I did not use his 2023 as his ceiling because we're a year and a half now into him not being that player. And so I feel like we have to acknowledge that. And it's not all on AJ Brown. It's systemic stuff going on with the offense. You've got uncatchable targets are a problem. His catchable targets, 4.3. That ranks 45th in the NFL. If you just go look at AJ Brown, you're like, oh man, targets 7.5 per game or 7.2 per game. That's 22nd. He could be fine. But the catchable targets are at 45th. Okay. And if you look at in 2024, it was the same problem. He was at 4.9. So now he's just slightly less than that. In 2023, it was 6.9 catchable targets per game. And so his catchable air yards this year, 36 per game. That ranks 49th in the NFL. So the other really tidbit I have to give here is Matt Harmon gave the warning last week. I don't know if you heard it, Jacob. We weren't talking about AJ Brown, but he came up in conversation as a potential trade candidate versus I can't remember who the player we used him on, but he was like, nah, I wouldn't trade that player away for AJ Brown. I think AJ Brown's not the same player anymore based on what he's seeing on film. So we also have that little tidbit rattling around in our heads. But I would say, looking at the comparisons, the way I broke it out, there were 153 because I went to a wider sample, 13.6 fantasy points per game. 10% were wide receiver ones, 36% were wide receiver twos, 34% were wide receiver threes, and 19% were wide receiver fours. So more outliers on the tail bad side than the tail upside. And that's something I always look for. So 10% could be wide receiver ones. 19% of his comps have been wide receiver fours. So most likely scenario is honestly borderline wide receiver two. Low end wide receiver two is what I would say on AJ Brown based on the utilization score. But what are your thoughts on this one? Because again, we get back into that catchable target stuff, and it could also be meat on the bone. Right? If they correct that, and then suddenly that's how you hit more your bull case with AJ Brown is the targets have been enough, but we need them to be catchable.
So I think that what Matt does is really important. I'm really, really glad that we have Matt Harmon doing more in-season reception perception charting now. That's really cool. And that's what's scared me the most on AJ Brown and is why I'm not in the buy low camp. Also, I think that there's a ton of good buy lows at wide receiver. Dan and I just did an episode on that. If you do want to check out Beyond the Box Score, that would be a good one to start with. It's building a juggernaut. And we're looking at, if you could add Derrick Henry for cheap or whatever, maybe that makes you a juggernaut. AJ Brown's not really one of the players I was comfortable putting in that bucket. I would buy Ladd McConkey, Zay Flowers, Brian Thomas Jr., even T. Higgins we brought up before the Thursday night game. Those are guys I would rather buy than Brown. I had Brown outside of my top 50 rest of season. The only thing that I can give you that's bullish is, and this is, so basically this is just if you are stuck holding Brown, you maybe get some hopium here, is that we know he's such an unprecedentedly good player. And I dug into any players I could find that had averaged, the types of per game totals and also per route totals, yard per route run rates that he had and what happened from their 27 to 28 age 27 to 28 seasons. And there were declines for all of them that, didn't leave teams or whatever. And we're looking at Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, and Demaryius Thomas. But it was a 14 to 16% decline in fantasy points per game from age 27 to 28. AJ Brown's currently at a 42% decline in terms of fantasy points per game from last year to this year. So it seems almost impossible that it could be anywhere near that low. The other thing I will say is that his yard per run rate is really insanely inflated relative to his fantasy points per game. And that is, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles factor, not passing very much, which affects his fantasy point totals. And that's what everybody's feeling and is so frustrated with right now. Demaryius Thomas is the only one who had a similar fantasy point per game number, 16.7, which is what AJB was at last year. He dropped to 14.1, and then he dropped by another 15% the next year. So really, this sort of precipitous drop-off is kind of unheard of.
Happened.
Yeah, for a player this good. It's really rare.
The comps put him at 13.6 fantasy points per game. What'd you just say was Demaryius Thomas? 14.1?
Yeah, that's where he went, his age 28
and
season.
And what did the other players land around that you mentioned?
They were all averaging significantly more fantasy points, but their decline was all almost identical to DT's, where it was 15, 16% year over year.
Gotcha. Okay.
So my
Okay.
guess is like this could be just a small sample size, and then that would mean if he's going to get up to like only a 15 to 25% decrease from last year to this year, that would be some big totals over these next few games to get that average up, right?
Yeah. But I think it is possible. I still think it's possible. And the reason why is because they're still going to him. Like, so his utilization score is mostly being driven by like he is getting targets, but what's holding him down is the catchable target stuff. And then obviously the fantasy point component that gets baked in, that's hurting him, as well. But I do think there's room for him to get better. And he's just, again, he's not super old, to your point. He's at a point where we would expect some reduction, but not to the degree that he's seen. So like if I could buy AJ Brown, like at a price tag of like someone was really treating him like a wide receiver 3, he's a wide receiver 4 right now in fantasy, guys, points per game. But if someone were willing to treat him as a wide receiver 3 and they would trade him to me at a wide receiver 3 price tag, like that feels like the break even spot, because that would mean 46% of the time, you would have a chance to profit. And I'm just adding the 36% of the time he would be a wide receiver 2 and the 10% he would be a wide receiver 12. But it's still not a slam dunk, because remember, we've got this other tail here that's looking at how often he would have finished as a wide receiver 4, which is what he is today, is 19% of the time. And here's the problem. No one's going to sell you AJ Brown for a wide receiver 4 price tag. They're just not going to do it. So like you can't even, maybe you can kick the tires and try someone. Sometimes people get fed up and they just do something funny out of emotion. But honestly, like that kind of puts me in a scenario where like you're most likely trading for him as a wide receiver 3. If you could make it happen, most people are going to want a wide receiver 2 return on him based on what they drafted him as, which was a wide receiver 1, which means you're probably not able to pull the deal off. So, I mean, if I could get him as a wide receiver 3, I'd be willing to like go ahead and risk it, knowing how good he's been over his career. But the optimal price to buy him at would be if you got him at more of a wide receiver 4 price tag, and no AJ Brown manager is going to do that. They would rather just stick to their guns than probably make that deal.
Yeah, I'm just not buying.
Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about Jalen Waddle. We got about 4 minutes here. So we talked about Harold Fannin Jr. a little bit earlier, so we'll leave him off, but we'll hit Jalen Waddle here. So we've got 2 games without Tyreek Hill. Ding, ding, ding. Small sample alert, guys, but he's got an 86 utilization score with 19.4 fantasy points per game. Now, the nice thing about Jalen Waddle, while we don't have a bunch of games historically without Tyreek Hill, is we can go back and look at plays without Tyreek Hill on the field with Jalen Waddle on the field. And basically, he was doing the things that we're seeing him do now, right, at a play level. And now we can actually break it down to a game level. And so 8.5 targets per game, 6.5 are catchable, 127 air yards per game with 95 being catchable. So he and Tua really dialed in right now. And if you look at his utilization score comps, there are 44 of them. Remember, I just said he's averaging 19.4 fantasy points per game. His historical comps average 16.9. Guys, which would still be a wide receiver 1. If you go back to 2011, essentially 16 fantasy points per game is usually the cut point for a top 12 wide receiver. Obviously, different years, it can be different based on performances, but 77% of them, Jacob, went on to be a wide receiver 1, so a top 12 wide receiver. 21% were in that wide receiver 2 bucket, only 2% in the wide receiver 3 bucket. I will say here, I also slightly extended the edges, not the upper edge, because I think we're getting that right now in the small sample, but I slightly increased the downside edge just because we're dealing with a 2-game sample to get to the 19.4. The number was actually a little bit higher when I just used the tighter band. So what are your thoughts on this and what the utilization score is saying about Jalen Waddle, what he's done, and the fact that, wow, 77% of the time his comps have been wide receiver 1s?
I love that. That points to the upside, which we know is freaking enormous with Waddle. Like, I had a really hard time with him in the rest of season rankings because I'm just nervous as hell about the team level situation. Coach could get fired, quarterback could get fired. Like, don't know what's going to go on.
And he gets injured.
Yes, he does.
He gets a lot of soft tissue injuries.
Yes. So. Don't need to talk about it. Honestly, I feel like that's messed up. It's PTSD. Like, every single week I see him go to the freaking blue tent and I cry. But yeah, like, here's Jalen Waddle's resume. If you just want to think about the upside, in addition to what Dwain laid out there with historical comps. 18-year-old breakout at Alabama, highest career yard per route run rate of any wide receiver drafted 2020 to 2025. Third year declare, 6th overall pick, 1,000 yards as a rookie, wide receiver 8 in fantasy in year 2. In year 3, he actually had a career best yard per route run rate. It just kind of flew under the radar because of a lot of different circumstantial stuff. And here we are without Tyreek Hill, and to no real surprise, he's crushing. And the thing is, the team, Matt Harmon has done a good job outlining this. The team isn't really even doing him any favors. They're basically just like, go out there and win down the field, which he's
And he
doing.
can do.
Yes, he can. And so like I brought up the first down stat being important from Ryan Heath. Jalen Waddle has 21 first downs on 29 touches, which is the sixth most at wide receiver. On a per route basis, he's fifth among receivers with 150 or more routes and first downs per route run, even above, the great and powerful Josh Downs. Like he really has been so,
I was
so, so
wondering
good.
how long I took the under on how long it would take for you to bring up Josh Downs, but you hit the over. Way to go.
Yeah, so I love Waddle as a buy, but he does, make me a little bit nervous. I put him just above like Lad McConkey. I put him above BTJ and players like that.
So where's that in your rest of season
So
ranks?
it's not quite as high as I think what your numbers would suggest, and that I think that's important to bring up. Is like it's. I guess I would view him similarly to like Christian McCaffrey or something like that, but just a much lower level. Where it's like I'm just nervous about buying into the injury and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. Like,
And I think that's fair. And those are things you have to bake in.
but the upside case is there. Like people are like, why isn't CMC one? And it's like because of that. But like if you just took the best version of Waddle, it's probably top 8 or 10 fantasy
Yeah.
receiver.
And I don't do rest of season ranks, but I do the rest of season projections for the site. So I try to account for some of those factors as well. But our rankings and projection can be slightly different. It's because of those things, right, that you're talking about there. But Waddle came in at wide receiver 14 in that. And so I did subdue him a little bit. I didn't like just push him all the way up into that wide receiver 1 territory. And part of it was due to the things that you just talked about there. I kept his target share a little bit lower than what it is right now. Took a game away from him over the course of the rest of the season. And so if it was on a points per game basis, which we always also look at, like he's like number 11. But if you look at him like for the total points we think he's going to give you for the rest of the season, which is the main thing that you guys care about, especially when you're comparing good player to good player, it is a little bit less, for Waddle. But yeah, the ceiling is absolutely there. But the nice thing with Waddle is this. I don't think anyone is thinking necessarily about that being his ceiling. I think most people that drafted Waddle got to draft him as a wide receiver 4. Then they were suddenly like, okay, I got a wide receiver 3. And now I think I have a wide receiver 2. So there is still upside from there. I think as long as he's healthy, you're getting a wide receiver 2. Like 21% of his comps were wide receiver 2s, 77% were wide receiver 1. So I feel like you're kind of buying him, assuming like he doesn't run into a catastrophic injury that makes him miss multiple games. I think wide receiver 2, even in a bad offense, is going to be his floor, like somewhere in that mid-range wide receiver 2. So if I could trade for Jalen Waddle at that price tag, I would. Like I would try to go get him, and knowing that I'm going to be sober-minded, and I think what I just got was a wide receiver 2. But I also know like I have this really good shot at him being a wide receiver 1 the rest of the way.
For sure. Yeah, he's a good buy.
Cool. All right. I think we'll wrap it there. We already talked about Harold Fannin Jr. earlier, but we both really like him. Played fantastic last week, guys, after David Njoku left. We're really trending towards Noah Njoku this week. Do have offensive environment concerns. Also could have like, I don't know, like a monsoon of wind or whatever going on.
Him and Waddle.
We'll keep an eye. Yeah, both the guys we just talked about. So
maybe buy him after this week.
Yeah. And again, this is ultimately going to come down to how long Njoku's out, or if they decide they want to trade Njoku or whatever. It seems like Cleveland needs a reset there. But we love Harold Fannin, so I think we'll just leave it at that. But anything that you want to promote here, Jacob, where folks can find your work, what you got coming out, kind of what your schedule looks like, so they know when to look for the different pieces of content that you're dropping each week.
You can find me on Twitter at jgibbs_23, and please do check out Beyond the Box Score. It's really fun. We've got Ryan Heath, all this, the Dan the Man. Like we've got 4 episodes a week. Really good stuff. We like to interact with the chat, so you can always, all our shows are live. If you want to come in and ask questions and stuff like that, we try to create time for that as well. And then FFT newsletter is also free. I'll put that in your inbox. You can get my updated rankings and just like talking through some of the players, trying to give you some more context, but that's important. You're here listening to Dwain, so the context matters. You got the goods.
All right, man. You guys go check out all of Jacob's work, doing great stuff. You're absolutely killing it, man. And I love to see it. Love to see how much you're growing. You're doing great on social. Like, people love it. Your stream of consciousness is doing awesome, because that gets a lot of people jumping in and following. And I also noticed you get a lot of engagement on it. So I think that's just great. And it's a tribute to, like, how you interact with people. And that just says a lot about you. So really great work on that front. As for the rest of you, we will talk data to me and to you again next Friday. So looking forward to that. Until then, make sure you go follow Jacob. Check out all of his work. We will see you then.